Hello everyone and welcome to our second webinar on taxation applicable to PPP contracts in Latin America. I am Marcos Portela Barreto. I'm a consul at Taylor Wessing, France, and I will be once again your host for today's session. Today I'm joined in the studio by Professor Bourget. He's a professor from University of Côte d'Azur in Nice. He's a professor in financial and tax law, and he will be in charge of making an introduction for today's topic before we go through each country presentations. Before we begin, I would like to make two announcements. First one, our speakers from Brazil and Honduras have been rescheduled for our third and last session of the series on January 13th. So please make sure to attend and save the date if you are interested by the Brazilian and Honduran case studies. The other announcement is about the possibility to ask questions during our session of today. We will have at the end of the event a Q&A session. So you will find my address, my email address in the comments section on YouTube, and you can send me your questions during the session, and I will share them with the speakers or Professor Bourget. Now, please let me introduce our distinguished speakers for today's session. We'll have from Écija, Ecuador, Bayardo Rafael Poveda. We will have from Écija, Mexico, Ricardo Chacon. We'll have from Écija, Dominican Republic, Polibio Valenzuela. And also from Écija, Panama, Antonio Alberto Vargas. And before we dive into the country-specific discussions, I'm happy to hand over to Professor Renaud Bourget for an introduction of our topic of today. He's going to make his introduction in Spanish. For the non-Spanish fluent attendees, we will have a translation on the social media during the next weeks. So please, Professor Bourget, the stage is yours.
Thank you, dear Marcos, for your presentation. Hello, everybody, and I will speak in Spanish. Buenas tardes o buenos días, más bien por la diferencia de hora. Es un placer poder acompañarle nuevamente en esa segunda sesión del webinar, donde vamos a presentar la fiscalidad aplicable a cargo de los abogados socios de Écija de los países interesados de Ecuador, de México, de República Dominicana y de Panamá. Y como lo había dicho la última vez en la primera sesión, desde los años 2010, y más que todo, las alianzas pública-privada están más presentes en el discurso y en la agenda política latinoamericana y en el Caribe, en comparación a lo que podía pasar hace unos 20 años, ya que los países latinoamericanos planifican e implementan este tipo de mecanismo en sectores que van desde lo tradicional, y estoy pensando en el transporte, la energía y agua, hasta lo más innovador, por ejemplo, atención médica, deporte, justicia y telecomunicación también. Y el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo y la Comisión Económica para América Latina hacen estudio y han observado, cuando se implementó hace unos 14 años, en un primer tiempo que no había la transparencia debida, pero últimamente se ha registrado, más que todo después del 2016 y del caso Odebrecht en Brasil y en otros países, se ha registrado más agencias especializadas que funcionan de forma más transparente y un compromiso real del poder político hacia una mayor transparencia. Dicho eso, vamos a empezar con el primer país, como Brasil y Honduras no están hoy presentes, con Ecuador. Voy siempre a presentar el contexto y el marco jurídico para ver si hay legislación específica o no, y dejaré obviamente a los especialistas presentar la fiscalidad aplicable. Y en Ecuador, de acuerdo con la base de datos de participación pública-privada en infraestructura del Banco Mundial, por ejemplo, entre el 2014 y 2020, se han registrado 5 proyectos que han alcanzado el cierre financiero y 4 proyectos de energía, un proyecto vial, y también la inversión privada ha aumentado en el sector energético, especialmente en proyectos de energía renovable con pequeñas centrales hidroeléctricas. Recientemente se sigue ese movimiento. El 27 de noviembre del 2024, el gobierno ha firmado el contrato de los estudios de prefactibilidad de la nueva vía entre Cuenca y Guayaquil, y lo ha firmado con una empresa corea, la Korea Expressway Corporation, KEC, y para un presupuesto de casi $2 millones. Y el 4 y 5 de noviembre también se ha firmado por parte del gobierno, de las autoridades ecuatorianas, en ese caso el secretario de Inversiones Público-Privadas, un memorando de entendimiento con la Corporación Comercial Canadiense para desarrollar una propuesta para los estudios de prefactibilidad y de factibilidad de un proyecto vial Loja-Catamayo que viene priorizado en el Registro Nacional de Alianza Público-Privado. De la misma forma también se puede hablar, y eso fue presentado el 29 de octubre del presente año, es muy reciente, y unos proyectos de la Superintendencia de Inversiones Público-Privada ha presentado estudio de perfectibilidad del corredor vial entre Menta y Quevedo, que son casi 200 kilómetros. Y otro de los del segundo proyecto más avanzado después de ese primer corredor es el corredor PIFO y de Baeza, que de unos 66 kilómetros. Y también he visto que hay otros 4 proyectos de corredores viales entre Montecristi y La Cadena, Bahía Cojimíes, Embato Baños Puyo y Loja Catamayo. El marco jurídico, pues ahora hay que empezar por nombrar al artículo 316 de la Constitución ecuatoriana, que dice: el Estado podrá delegar la participación en los sectores estratégicos y servicios públicos a empresa mixta en las cuales tenga mayoría accionaria. Y el Estado podrá de forma excepcional delegar a la iniciativa privada y a la economía popular y solidaria el ejercicio de estas actividades en los casos establecidos por la ley. Ecuador ya contaba con una reglamentación específica sobre alianzas público-privadas y desde el 2015 había unas regulaciones para el régimen de asociaciones pública-privada, que es un decreto ejecutivo del marzo del 2015. Una ley marco también de incentivo para APP e inversión extranjera de diciembre del 2015. Y también unas regulaciones generales para la aplicación de la ley marco de incentivo para APP e inversiones extranjeras de junio del 2016. Pero desde entonces hubo cambio político y el marco jurídico de Ecuador ha seguido desarrollándose. Y muy recientemente, en diciembre del 2023, se aprobó la Ley de Eficiencia Económica y Generación de Empleo. Y esa ley se la llama la Ley APP. Y según el legislador ecuatoriano, esa ley pues impulsa y el desarrollo económico y la generación de empleo a través de las alianzas público-privada, y se destacan tres puntos. Y esa ley permite una estructuración centralizada de proyecto de APP y con la creación de una Secretaría de Inversión Público-Privada que se llama SIPP, y un régimen tributario general y claridad en los roles. Y los proyectos de APP se rigen por el régimen tributario general y se definen con claridad los roles y la estructura institucional en la ley, lo que incluye la evaluación de iniciativas privadas por parte de la SIP y la declaración de interés público por parte del Comité Interinstitucional de Asociaciones Público-Privadas, y también una garantía de sostenibilidad fiscal de los proyectos de APP. Luego de esa ley se ha tomado el reglamento para asociaciones público-privadas en un decreto ejecutivo de inicios de febrero del 2024, tiene menos de un año, cuyo artículo 222 establece lo siguiente. Ese libro tiene por objeto establecer el marco institucional y los procesos aplicables para el desarrollo, financiamiento y gestión en todas sus fases de los proyectos públicos de APP, de conformidad con los términos del artículo 316 de la Constitución de la República. Ese reglamento fue elaborado por la Secretaría de Inversiones Pública-Privada, la famosa SIP, con la asistencia técnica del Banco Mundial. Y como en otros países, porque cuando se ve las normativas son muy semejantes, y ese trabajo legislativo, ese trabajo normativo se basó en las disposiciones legislativas modelo sobre asociaciones público-privadas de la Comisión de las Naciones Unidas para el Derecho Mercantil Internacional. Ecuador también cuenta con un ente especializado, una Secretaría de Inversiones Pública-Privada, y su funcionamiento, su objeto viene plasmado en el artículo 244 de dicho reglamento. Tiene por objeto estructurar los proyectos de APP en el ámbito de la Administración Pública Central, así como coordinar, articular acciones interinstitucionales para promover, atraer, facilitar, concretar y mantener las inversiones privadas asociadas a la generación de infraestructura y prestación de servicio a través de la modalidad de los APP. Entonces, Ecuador tiene a la vez una legislación especializada y agencia especializada, que es la evolución normal, la evolución común que observamos desde hace 10, 14 años en Latinoamérica. Segundo país, México. Entre inicios de los años 1990 y finales de los 2010, México adjuntó un total de 305 proyectos de infraestructura con participación privada por un valor que sería de 163.000 millones de dólares. Y entre estos 305 proyectos, podemos destacar 69 proyectos viales, 63 proyectos de electricidad, 55 de agua y saneamiento, 43 de gas natural, 30 proyectos portuarios, 11 proyectos de tecnología de la información y de la comunicación, en materia de comunicación de teléfono celular, etc., 8 proyectos ferroviarios y 6 proyectos aeroportuarios. Por lo cual, México es un gran mercado, uno de los mercados mayores con Brasil de activos de APP. Y últimamente se utiliza el sistema de APP, he visto, y están hoy en día en proceso de ejecución la ampliación del complejo penitenciario en Papantla, el nuevo acuario de Mazatlán en Sinaloa y la red compartida Promptel. El marco jurídico, pues también México cuenta con una ley especializada que es la Ley de Asociaciones Pública-Privadas del 16 de enero del 2012, ley que fue modificada recientemente en el 2018. México también es un país federal como Brasil, lo hubiera dicho con Brasil al presentar Brasil en su caso, Y si bien la nueva legislación nacional de APP puede aplicarse a nivel federal, regional, municipal, los estados federados y los municipios también han creado su propio marco normativo de APP. Así las cosas, podemos citar a la ley de APP del 2014 para el estado de Baja California, la ley de APP del 2015 para el estado de Veracruz o la ley de APP del 2018 del estado de México, cerca de la ciudad de México, cuya capital es Toluca. También hay agencia especializada. En ese caso, la Secretaría de Hacienda y Crédito Público, la SHCP, ha desarrollado la estrategia de impulso a proyectos de asociación público-privadas. También existe la unidad de inversiones de esa Secretaría de Hacienda que ha emitido diversos lineamientos con relación al registro, evaluación social, y medioambiental también y conveniencia de los proyectos de APP. De esta manera, si bien no existe una agencia a nivel federal o estatal exclusivamente dedicada a las APP, la Ley de Asociaciones Público-Privadas otorga a la Secretaría de Hacienda y Crédito Público la facultad para interpretar con fines administrativos la ley de APP. Y en ese caso produce lo que nosotros en Francia llamamos doctrina administrativa, que es cuando la administración interpreta los textos, las leyes, los reglamentos, y tenemos una especialidad en Francia que es que esa interpretación administrativa, esa doctrina administrativa en materia fiscal es vinculante para la administración y el contribuyente puede oponerla a la administración en vía contenciosa. Seguimos con República Dominicana. República Dominicana conoce una estrategia nacional de desarrollo para el 2030 que apunta a extender y a fortalecer las APP para los sectores de la agricultura y del turismo. El gobierno formula un plan nacional plurianual del sector público cada 4 años para delinear los objetivos para la inversión del gobierno y este incluye una lista de proyectos de infraestructura. El 18 de marzo del 2024, entonces es muy reciente, el presidente de República Dominicana, Luis Abinader, se refirió en una rueda de prensa a las APP y describiéndolas como herramienta de desarrollo nacional que representa una alternativa clave para impulsar proyectos de infraestructura estratégica. El jefe de Estado anunció en esa rueda de prensa que se había recibido a la fecha, o sea, a mediados de marzo del 2024, 26 iniciativas, y entre las cuales 21 del sector privado. Por ejemplo, se adjudicó un contrato para la readecuación del puerto Duarte en Arroyo Barril y está en proceso hoy en día el contrato para la autopista de Embar. Además, hay 12 iniciativas en evaluación que se refiere a proyecto vial, movilidad urbana, puertos, turismos, servicios públicos, energía, defensa nacional, salud y agua. También me he fijado que el 8 de noviembre, hace un mes exactamente, el Fideicomiso para el Desarrollo del Sistema de Transporte Masivo de la República Dominicana informó sobre la cancelación del proceso de licitación de la infraestructura del tren metropolitano de Santo Domingo, que hoy en día no existe y se plantea justamente construirlo por el motivo siguiente. Como parte de la estrategia de financiación de proyecto estratégico y prioritario para la gestión del gobierno, se ha decidido cancelar el proceso de licitación para el tren metropolitano de Santo Domingo, proceso que será replanteado como un proyecto de APP, según establece el mecanismo que permita la ley. Entonces, ahí tenemos y la cancelación de un proceso de licitación para volver a armarlo bajo el mecanismo de APP. El mecanismo jurídico, pues hasta inicio del 2020, República Dominicana no contaba aún con una legislación específica. Y aún así el país participaba activamente en la creación de un nuevo marco regulatorio de APP y se envió una ley de APP a Congreso a finales del 2018. Ese proyecto dio lugar a la ley de APP del 21 de febrero del 2020 y el presidente de la República al día siguiente publicó el reglamento de aplicación de esa ley de APP y ese artículo 5 de esa ley ha creado una agencia especializada para desarrollar APP e introducir principios de buena gobernabilidad, de transparencia y rendición de cuenta. Y esa agencia especializada, creada por el artículo 5, se llama la Dirección General de APP, que viene configurada como una entidad autónoma y descentralizada del Estado, investida de personalidad jurídica, patrimonio propio, autonomía administrativa, jurisdiccional, financiera y técnica, y está adscrita al Ministerio de la Presidencia. También he visto, y solamente lo voy a destacar muy brevemente, que en esa ley hay un capítulo 13 que se titula del tratamiento fiscal y tiene 2 artículos. Artículo 78, exención temporal durante los 5 primeros años de la realización y de la explotación del proyecto de APP, exención al impuesto a la transferencia de bienes y servicios, ITBIS. Segundo artículo 79, el adjudicatario podrá acceder a un régimen de despreciación y amortización acelerada. Y para terminar, Panamá, porque no hay Honduras. Entonces, Panamá adjudicó un total de 35 proyectos de APP entre inicios de los años 1920 y finales de los 2010. Y hay 22 proyectos de electricidad, 2 proyectos de tecnología de la información y comunicación, 5 proyectos de infraestructura portuaria y un proyecto ferroviario y 2 proyectos viales. El marco jurídico tiene que ver un poco con lo que acabamos de ver con República Dominicana. Si Panamá ha carecido de una legislación general sobre las APP durante varios años, ya no es el caso. Desde la ley del 19 de septiembre del 2019 que ha creado el régimen de APP para el desarrollo como incentivo a la inversión privada, al desarrollo social y a la creación de empleo. Hay que subrayar que también el artículo 10 de dicha ley establece lo que se llama un ente rector. Ese ente rector viene conformado por el ministro de la Presidencia, ministro de Economía y Finanzas, ministro de Obras Públicas, ministro de Comercio e Industria, ministro de Relaciones Exteriores y el Contralor General de la República. Y ese ente tiene como misión la aprobación o rechazo, autorización y formulación de cada APP. Asimismo, el artículo 12 de dicha ley ha creado una agencia especializada que se llama la Secretaría Nacional de Acciones Públicas Privadas. Y las propuestas de proyecto de APPs son evaluadas por la Secretaría Nacional de APP antes de ser remitida al ente rector cuya composición le acabo de indicar. Luego, el ente rector evalúa la propuesta aprobada por la Secretaría Nacional de APP basándose en la propuesta de informe técnico que le han remitido y que examina el análisis social general, el análisis costo-beneficio, la distribución de riesgo, los indicadores de servicios y el análisis ambiental preliminar. Bueno, con eso ya he terminado con la presentación. Ahora bien, habíamos visto ya en la sesión previa y que hay un dato muy importante para el inversionista y más que todo para el inversionista también extranjero que se busca porque muchas veces las APP se desarrollaron con un control fuerte del Estado. También, por ejemplo, en Brasil había Odebrecht, ¿no?, que lo controlaba todo y con el caso de corrupción se salió del mercado y eso ha permitido a inversiones extranjeras entrar donde antes no podían entrar por falta de transparencia. Entonces, hoy en día, Y pues se recuerda lo que decía Adam Smith en su investigación sobre la naturaleza y causas de la riqueza de las naciones. Él decía que, y eso es el pensamiento liberal, por ejemplo, Juan Bautista Alberdi hubiera dicho lo mismo y decía lo mismo en su sistema rentístico sobre Argentina, que se necesita seguridad para y el inversor. Y se necesita, decía Adam Smith, hay principios fundamentales del sistema fiscal: equality, convenience of payment, economy in collection. Y lo que más nos interesa es la certainty, la certeza, el principio de certeza. Y él decía que el contribuyente tiene que tener claro lo que va a tener que pagar, que eso tiene que ser establecido, firme y no arbitrario. Él decía que la modalidad del pago, la cantidad a pagar, todo eso tiene que ser to be clear and plain. Y entonces, habíamos visto también la semana pasada que en Perú existe desde los años, hace unos 30 años, para los inversionistas extranjeros, cuando realizan APP, y el Estado peruano firma con ellos lo que se llama un convenio de estabilidad jurídica, que le va a garantizar la aplicación del marco jurídico y fiscal que existe cuando se comprometan y que invierten en el Perú. Y son convenios de estabilidad jurídica que son contrato leyes, tiene carácter civil y no administrativo, y de hecho se rigen por el Código Civil, lo que puede un poco llamar la atención del tributarista con una formación de derecho romano-germánico, porque sabemos que la materia fiscal, el vinculum iuris, la relación jurídica de obligación tributaria, es una relación con una obligación legal de naturaleza de derecho público que no permite la figura contractual. Entonces, jurídicamente se podría cuestionar ese convenio, pero existe y forma parte de las herramientas que le pueden dar confianza al inversor en materia de APP. Entonces, terminando con esa pregunta, a ver si hoy entre los 4 países que vamos a estudiar si existe algo semejante. Muchas gracias por haberme escuchado y por la palabra, y vuelvo a dar la palabra a Marcos.
Thank you, Professor Bourget. Thank you for your very brilliant and detailed introduction. I think we have a great foundation for our discussions for today. And so let's move with every country-specific presentation by our esteemed speakers. And maybe for Ecuador, Bayardo, do you wish to start, please?
Yeah, sure. Good morning. Good morning to my esteemed colleagues here in Latin America, and probably good evening almost for you in France, Marcos. Well, first of all, thank you, Professor Bourget. Thank you very much for such an interesting introduction. You're very well informed. Well, in terms of Ecuador, I think that you have gone through most of what my presentation was going to be about. But I will refer to the same legislation that you referred to, and I will try to go rapidly, and then I will address to the public-private projects stimulus that are established in our legislation. I have divided my presentation in the chapters that you have seen. Next, please. Next, please. And I would like to start by making a very brief introduction about Ecuador. Firstly, you know, Ecuador is strategically located in South America. It has a Pacific coast, and it may go into the Amazon through the Napo River and into the Amazonas River. Another interesting issue of Ecuador is that our legal tender is the US dollar. There's no currency exchange control, and the dividends and the investments are freely repatriable. I would like also to address the issue of our figures, and well, I would like to say that our economy is rather small compared to our neighborhoods, and we have nowadays an interesting and important GDP debt ratio, which is around 80%, 81%. We are an 18 million inhabitants market, and our economically active population is 8.5 million. Our main commercial partners are the US, the USA, the EU, China, Panama, and the Andean community. Our main exports are composed by oil and derivatives, and we also have a non-oil trade balance composed by shrimp, bananas, cacao, canned fish, lead and copper concentrate, flash flowers, gold, and other mining products. We have had a positive trade balance sustainably during the last 15 years, 20 years, I would say. However, as you may be aware of, we are facing quite a difficult crisis in terms of um, increasing the rate of unemployment, increasing the poverty rate, increasing the extreme poverty rate, and also we have a rather low GDP growth projection for 2025. As we will see later on, there are several factors for this crisis. I will not discuss those factors in deep, but I would like to address two key factors: the reduction in public investment and the prolonged stagnant private investment. Next, please. This figure shows the evolution of public investment versus the Ecuadorian GDP. And you may see that during the last years, the public investment in Ecuador has dropped very considerably. Next, please. This graphic shows also the behavior of private investment. And if you see the years, I would like to focus on the years. If you look at 2015, this is one of the highest percentage rate of private investment vis-a-vis our GDP in Ecuador. And if we go back to the previous slide, please, you're going to see that also during 2013, 14, 15, public investment is important. This shows basically that public investment is a driver to private investment. So I wouldn't like to criticize the public policy, the current public policy. However, I think that the numbers speak for themselves. May we move forward, please? Next. So that was just not. Could you please go back? I wanted to put this in context because I want to remark the fact that investment is key for certain equilibrium. It is, as you know, it is already difficult to reach to certain equilibrium. It is difficult to keep everybody happy. We know that, But something that our leaders should understand is that economics should be treated aside politics. And then that leads me to tell you that this evidence is clear enough, um, and shows that we need to make efforts to promote both kind of investments, in some kind of a positive symbiosis environment. However, as you will see in the next slide, the evolution has been rather post. Um, recent story. I would like to start explaining that by 1993, the administration enacted the State Modernization Act, providing that the state may grant concessions to the private sector and execute any kind of contracts as provided by law. In 1996, the government enacted the Concession Act, which was a step forward, and basically that Concession Act was more developed in terms of regulated the concession contracts and establishing what were the economic sectors that were able to be subject to a concession. Basically, during the 90s, every sector of the economy was open to private investment. We had what we call a liberalization of the economy, and that was accompanied by a deregulation of the financial sector, and that ended up with a crisis, with a banking crisis, by the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, and then is when we adopted the dollar as a legal tender. The second landmark, I would say, during this history is the Constitution of 2008 that was quoted by Professor Bourget. And this Constitution establishes that the public services and strategic sectors are reserved to the state, except as for delegation as provided by the law, which was very well explained by Professor Bourget. If I wouldn't like to go back to the previous slide. I would like to emphasize. No, not please. Don't go back to the previous slide. Please move forward. I would just like to emphasize that. No, please go back one slide, please. Just to emphasize that, as we saw in the graphics, when public investment increased, private investment also increased. So between 2008 and 2015, there was a high rate of public investment, followed by a high rate of private investment. And it is in 2015 when the organic law of incentives for public-private partnerships and foreign investment is enacted. This is already a typical PPP law, and this law included the classical principles of PPP, including risk allocation, value for money, efficiency, free competition, accountability, and dispute resolution, among others. Under this law, a certain number of projects were approved, and certain PPP contracts were executed and are operating already. And as Professor Bourget mentioned, the law was somehow reenacted, reformulated in 2023. I would say that certain aspects of the former law were clarified, especially the scope. The current law establishes that all areas of the economy are susceptible of being subject to a PPP project, including infrastructure in public services, strategic sectors, which are oil and gas, energy, mining, and telecommunication, and roads, and other public services. And also, the law establishes that the projects may go from scratch up to develop of existing infrastructure. That is, projects may be greenfield, brownfield, or yellowfield. In 2024, as Professor mentioned, the regulation to the Organic Law for Economic Efficiency was enacted. This brings also interesting improvements that abound for certainty, because it includes regulation for the financing of the projects, the rights of the lenders, the and something that's very important for certainty of recovery of investment, which is the payment method. And they have included the possibility of the PPP project to incorporate a fund for trust, which is in charge of making the payments that correspond to the public and the private partner. So this is in a nutshell, this is the development during the last 30 years of our legislation in public-private participation projects. Next, please. Next, please. As I mentioned, well, the regulatory platform is quite competitive compared to our neighborhood countries. There's also a whole set of guidelines, which amounts to the conclusion reached by Professor Bourget, in terms that nowadays Ecuador counts with rather a standard legal framework for public-private participation projects. Next, please. I would also like to present what would be a typical PPP project in Ecuador. And as you may see, the whole cycle is quite common, it's quite standard, and it includes the planning and eligibility, the feasibility studies, then structuring. It enhances and promotes competition, and then it goes through an approval process that well, there's a lot of analysis that's carried out by the Secretariat of Public-Private Participation, and then it ends up with the execution of the PP contract. So basically, nothing very new, nothing strange. Rather, it is quite a complete set of laws and lower hierarchy regulations that, in my opinion, conform quite reasonable legal framework for PPP investment. Next, please. In spite of these efforts, especially the efforts of the last 3 or 4 administrations, in spite of those efforts, I would say that if we compare our activity, our PPP activity, with our neighborhood countries, with other Latin American countries and economies, there's a big difference. There's a huge difference in terms of development of projects. As you may see, this this data shows that there's at least 80 projects in Chile ever since the law was enacted. Brazil, 120 projects. Peru, which would be our most close comparable country, 52 projects. Next, please. Colombia, as of 2012, 69 projects. Mexico, 60 projects. And our country, as of 2015, the data I have is that we have 5 projects already closed and in construction or in operation. There are other projects as Professor Bourget explained, there are other projects that are in early stages, but we have no more than 5 projects with a contract value of $2.5 billion, which is very different if you compare it to the rest of Latin America. And that creates concern. If you look at these figures, it's somehow concerning. Next, please. Well, as I mentioned before, there's been an effort of the last administrations to promote investment, and there are financial and legal stimulus provided by our law to promote and foster foreign investment through PPP. And I would divide those stimulus and incentives in tax breaks and legal incentives. And I am going to talk about them in the next few minutes. Next, please. I would like to start by explaining that the general tax regime applicable to corporation is, in a few words, what you see in your screen. It's 25% income tax, 15% VAT tax, 5% outlaw tax. This tax is rather difficult to understand from abroad. It's a tax that we apply to payments abroad by using the financial system. So, except for certain cases, all payments that you make abroad are subject to a 5% outlaw tax, which is very debatable and has been on the table for the last, at least for the last 5 years, and the government finally has made the decision to lower the rate to 2.5% as of April 2025. There's also a municipal business license. There's also a municipal 1.5 per thousand over the total assets of the corporation. And there's also custom duties for foreign trade taxes. That will be the tax regime applicable to all corporations. There's also other kinds of contribution stuff, but these are the main taxes applicable to corporations. Now I am going to explain what are the tax breaks included lately in our legislation as stimulus for private investments to be made in Ecuador through the form of PPP contracts. Next, please. Firstly, we have a 10-year income tax exemption on dividends and profits, which is during the first 10 years of the projects, you are not going to pay the 25% income tax that we talked about before. Secondly, and it's quite standard stimulus, you have the right to accelerated depreciation depending on the assets. The regulation provides for you to be able to depreciate your assets more rapidly, therefore having an impact on the income tax as well. You have an exemption to the 5% outflow tax that we recently analyzed, and that applies for the importation of goods, the acquisition of services, payment to financing entities, distributions of dividends or profits, and payments for the acquisition of shares of securities in case such is part of the PPP project. Next, please. Additional tax benefits include the possibility that the company that will develop the PPP project will act as a VAT withholding agent in the same terms and conditions as public companies. In other words, you are going to have an advantage in your cash flow, temporary, but in the end, it is going to be an advantage. There's also the application of the most favorable tax benefit in case of doubt. And there's also the possibility to execute investment agreements with the state, such investment agreements providing for tax and legal stability. This is quite debatable, as Monsieur Bourget mentioned before. And actually, what happens in Ecuador is that you don't have the right to freeze your tax rates. That is, if there's a change in the tax legislation or the tax rates, though that change is going to apply to your project. On the contrary, what you have is the right to renegotiate the economic terms or the economic equation of the contract. That's what the contract provides. It's not freezing your tax rates, it's having the possibility to re-equilibrate the contract. And also, as for legal stability, well, it guarantees that the laws that were enforced by the time of the execution of the PPP contract will continue to be applied to the PPP contract despite any changes or amendments or abrogations. Next, please. There's also other kind of tax breaks that should be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. And these tax rates are applicable to what we call productive new investment. They are also introduced, so that they may also be via the investment agreement that we talked about recently. Well, it includes an additional 5% reduction in your income tax. That'll be a case that you are already paying taxes, so that wouldn't be a steal, even for the projects that are already in operation. However, if you have a new investment which is not under a PPP, and you have and it is what the law calls a productive investment. You have the right to this special reduction in your income tax. There is an exception for foreign trade taxes, custom duties, also as regulated, and there is also an exception from municipal taxes, which in some cases may be quite high. Um, but as I mentioned, these tax breaks will be rather applicable to investments who are outside the sphere of PPP projects. It's too early to say that these particular tax breaks will apply to the existing PPP projects, given the fact that they are rather recent. Next, please. And we also have uh, additional legal incentives provided by the law, uh, mainly included within the latest legislation, 2023, 2024. And it's the fact that, for example, financial entities, public financial entities may provide state aid for PPP project. And the examples of this aid is, well, financing the pre-structuring structuring studies, financing the technical, legal, and feasibility, financing preparing and structuring the project from a technically, legally, and financially standpoint, and financing the designs and implementing a guarantee fund to enhance the bankability of projects. The latest, the last one is very important, given the fact that we have had the case of several projects that, even though the contracts have been already signed, and I'm not talking specifically of PPP projects, but rather concession projects. Although the concession contracts have been already signed, it's been almost, or it's been practically impossible to reach to financial closing, and they are still waiting for financial closing. So the idea here is that somehow the Ecuadorian Development Bank provides aid to enhance the bankability of the project. And next, please. And as I mentioned before, the law also provides a possibility for the companies that are participating in a PPP project to pledge or grant a guarantee over the assets and the financial flows of the PPP project. That's rather new, and that amounts to certainty, because we had in the past we had problems with projects, specifically concession projects, which were which had problems during negotiation, and it was difficult to reach to financial closing, namely because the state didn't know whether or not there could be a stepping right, or whether the flows could be pledged. Now there's clarity and certainty that the company or the SPV will be able to basically pledge the assets and the flows for the benefit of the project and in favor of the lenders. And also, the law currently establishes that the relationship with third parties, lenders, will be merely private and regulated under private law. That's, I think, the whole package of stimulus. There may be another different stimulus for specific projects such as clean energies, but I wouldn't like to take as much of time because I think it's been more than 20 minutes, and then so I would like to finish here. I thank you very much. I thank you again, and thank you for attending to the conference.
Thank you, Bayardo, for your very interesting, very comprehensive presentation. We are going to move to Mexico and Ricardo Chacon. But just one word, if we want to take at least one or two questions for the Q&A, we have to be a little bit more shorter. But thank you a lot. Ricardo, please take the camera. I think we have maybe a technical issue with Ricardo. No? Yeah. No, it's okay.
Hello, can you hear me well? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much to everybody, and thank you for uh, Professor Bruguet for this outstanding and incredible introduction to the PPPs contracts in our region in LATAM. Of course, it's increasing and very important topic, and these type of contracts, public-private partnership contracts, are having a power to enhance development in our regions and in our countries. As Professor was mentioning before, Mexico has been very active in this type of contracts and in legislation. As he mentioned, we have more than 305 contracts ongoing or fully in place. So that is a small token of the importance that the government has placed in this type of services and manner to include infrastructure. Let me start with a brief introduction of this presentation. As we will be focusing on our webinar focus on taxation, let me just give you a brief focus on how I will manage these minutes of the presentation. Um, First, what is the PPPs? These are mechanisms for infrastructure development and product services delivered in Mexico. The legal framework, we have a law enacted in 2012. Of course, this law has been in place and more amended in 2018, and this will be focusing. We will be focusing on tax incentive. Please, next slide. Okay. First, the legal framework. The PPP guidelines, the law and the regulations, as mentioned, law enacted in 2012, amendment in 2018. We have the authority in charge of having this oversight, which is the Ministry of Finance, the Secretary of Credit, and the investment units. These are the federal governmental entities who are in charge of oversighting all the PPPs projects in Mexico, in all the Mexican Republic. The coverage of the law, it's the fully life of the PPP contract. starts with the project, the beginning of the project, the financing, the implementation, and all the termination and its class and the termination process. Of course, the PPP guidelines and the rules are harmonized or look to harmonize these projects among other legislation, local and federal legislation. The guidelines are based in the Constitution, but there are other laws and other manners for the government to have private investments in place, such as acquisitions law. So the PPP try to harmonize all the investments manners. Next slide, please. So looking in specifics of the taxation of PPP contracts. PPP contracts, as you know, they have the private investment, and the private has to fulfill with general taxations. First, the first tax applicable is the corporate income tax. Then we have the VAT, we have withholding taxes, local taxes, and in specific taxes. There are also certain tax incentives specific to the PPPs. Next slide, please. General terms of the income tax applies to private entities with the profits. It generates to the profits on the tax on the profits on the entities with a tax rate of 30%. The general tax rate is 30%. However, this varies depending on the income and other specifics located in our tax code. The deductions are also applicable, which basically go to capital expenditures, operational costs, and so on. Next slide, please. The VAT. VAT is applicable to the goods and services provided under PPP contracts. The rate is 60%, and private entities must ensure compliance, of course, of VAT regulations. And VAT includes invoicing, VAT returns, input VAT rates, and so on. So that this is the general VAT rules applicable to all these entities. Next, please. Withholding taxes. When a party is foreigner or a foreigner is a shareholder in entities participating in a PPP project, there might be withholding taxes when payments are made to foreigners, to these foreign shareholders. So payment to foreign entities such as dividends, interest, royalties, technical assistance, and so on are subject or might be subject to withholding taxes. The withholding taxes rates vary depending on the tax to be subject and also on the tax treaty. As you probably know, Mexico has many tax treaties to avoid double taxation with most of the countries worldwide. So depending on the origin of the foreign entity or the foreign shareholdings, the rate will apply pursuant to the tax treaties. Next invoice, please. Sorry, next slide. When we look at the local taxes, as Professor was mentioning before, Mexico is a federal republic. However, each state has its own regulations. Even in PPP, some states have enacted particular and specific PPP legislation. This means that some PPP projects may be placed or located in some specific law entities. In such and in other entities, particular local taxes are applicable. These taxes are related to property taxes, municipal services fees, salary taxes, and so on. So it's important to look into the location where the PPP will be performed to confirm local or specific local taxes which may be applied. As mentioned before, these local taxes vary from region to region. Okay, please, next slide. Well, to encourage private investment in infrastructure and in PPP contracts, the Mexican government has enacted certain tax incentive for these projects. These incentive include accelerated depreciation for capital investments, tax credits, research and development credits for these type of activities, exemption and reduction of certain taxes. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the Mexican government has been very, very active in promoting PPPs contracts, and that is starting now to develop again. So the tax incentives are of the essence for investments. So the government is aware of such need. So again, it has enacted all these incentives to promote the PPP contracts. Please, next slide. We have been mentioned as well these stability clauses. As you know, PPP contracts are very long-term or long-term contracts, and investments require certain guarantees that their investment will be stable in the country, despite uh, political changes or despite economic fluctuations, they require certain stability on the contracts. And we're mentioning the work contracts. That means that we are under equal relationship, as was mentioned before. Like in Peru, these contracts are ultimately governed by the civil law. In Mexico, civil law is also applicable, and the principle of the parties are bound by their willingness to, at the moment of entering the contract, it applies to these PPPs as well. So that means that the contracts have to be fulfilled as enacted or as entered by the parties. So the agreements have to be fulfilled. Notwithstanding this general principle that applies in Mexico, there are, or it's possible to, or we find these stability clauses in PPP contracts. And the main goal is to protect investors from these adverse legal or regulatory changes. These stability clauses might go, or we might find them in type of freezing clauses, or economic equilibrium clauses between the parties, such as the fluctuation of the exchange rates or so on. So again, that can be found in this type of contracts. Next slide, please. One of the very important, and for this the current administration, it's very important. They have placed importance in energy sectors and the um, uh, new energy projects and nature projects is the significant capital investment long-term operation. Uh, Energy is very important. So in particular, energy projects, they have placed certain incentives as renewable energy tax credits, for example. Again, this government aims to promote the incentive in energy and new energies and clean energies. One important thing that we might find in this type of PPPs is the power purchase agreement. Power purchase agreement means that the government guarantees certain purchase of the energy that is produced under these contracts, so that helps the investor to easily oversee or calculate the financial viability of the projects. So this next slide. Important compliance and reporting requirements. There are very specific rules and compliance reporting legislation applicable to PPPs. The Mexican authority, in particular, who oversees this compliance, is the SAT, the uh, administrative system for taxes, and there are very heavy penalties for non-compliance. So these compliance and reporting requirements are very important to be observed. Finally, please next slide. Tax implications and final are very important to be observed and to be reviewed in any type of PPP project contracts. It is important to understand the tax obligations and incentives before entering this type of contracts. And it is also very important to adapt and continue monitoring the legal changes in tax clauses. There are certain incentives that might be passed after the contract, which might be applicable or the private investor may benefit from those. So it's important to, even after the PPP has been in place, to continue observing the new tax landscape and the new tax laws which are adaptive. I try to stick to the time that I was provided. So thank you for the time. I'm glad to respond any comment that you might have. Thank you.
Ricardo, thank you very much for your analysis. I think it gave us a very clear vision of the Mexican framework. And now we're going to move to Dominican Republic with Polibio. Polibio, the camera is yours, please.
Thank you, Marcos. Thanks for having me here, and thanks to Professor Guille as well. I would like to start with, as Professor Guille was mentioned, there has been several developments regarding PPPs in Dominican Republic. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yes, the following one, please. Okay, so as Professor Ruja mentioned, the law on public-private partnerships was enacted on 2020, and from that time to now, there has been many initiatives, some private initiatives, other public initiatives, and so far it has been there's one project, port, that has advanced significantly. However, before the enactment of that law, of the public-private partnerships law, there was another law, the law 340 of 2006, which was regarding the procurement and contracting of goods, services, works, and concessions. So even though under the category of public-private partnerships, we only could mention story from 2020 to now. There has been several examples of public partnership, public-private interactions in the Dominican Republic, as we will see in the following slides. So far, or up to now, we have the main law, which is 4720 of public-private partnerships, then a presidential decree, which is the applicable regulation of said law. And then after that, there are several guidelines and methodologies approved by the agency in charge of PPPs in the Dominican Republic, which is the General Director of Public-Private Partnerships. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what are the sectors for PPP developments in the Dominican Republic? Next slide, please. So this is based on resolution or approved by the PPP agency in the Dominican Republic. Basically, it mentions several sectors, which include road infrastructure, aeronautics, ports, water, health, agriculture, energy, housing, tourism, international trade, urban infrastructure and mobility, telecommunications, education, public safety, and national defense. Something important to mention is that in the Dominican Republic, well, we have now a general law, PPPs, and before that, we had the concessions law, as I mentioned, which is still valid. It's still in place, but without the concession articles, which were eliminated upon the approval or the enactment of the PPP law. So we do have in the Dominican Republic, we have the PPP general law, and we had the concessions law. But in addition to those laws, the general law, we had a specific regulation for a diverse number of sectors. For instance, mining, tourism, electricity, renewable energy, telecommunications, etc. So even though we can only refer to that PPP's project, if we go into specific sectors, then we would see there's a lot of interaction of public agencies and private parties. For instance, energy, the development of energy projects, mostly generation, but also on the mining. In the Dominican Republic, the while private parties are maybe the owners of the land, the government owns everything that it's beneath the surface. So mining needs a concession in order to exploit those resources. There are specific laws and rules for mining. There has been agreement also regarding waste management and landfills. As I said, electricity and renewable energy, telecommunications, gas pipelines, roads, etc. We'll go to the next slide, please. So where we are in terms of PPPs in the Dominican Republic. Next slide. As we have mentioned, there's disagreement for the design, construction, exploitation, and operations of a tourist facility, a cruise ship terminal, and there has been a number of initiatives on PPPs in the Dominican Republic, private initiatives and public initiatives. As it has been mentioned, the General Director of PPPs, it operates as a regulator, but as an intermediary between the public agency or entity that wants to contract or the project, and the private parties interested in those projects, in operating or developing those projects. So there has been a number of projects, relevant projects that has been considered. There's a significant project in tourism for the development of a new tourism area in Pedernales. It's been developing a number of hotels with ports, airports, and it's been done with the assistance of this entity as well. So getting into the tax treatment of the PPPs, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So in general terms, in the Dominican Republic, um, all tax exemptions need to be approved by the National Congress, one way or the other. This could happen either by the approval on a specific law, awarding exemptions just to developing specific projects. For instance, with the renewable energy, there has been a number of incentives for everyone developing projects that comply with the requirements of said law. Or it could be just the law could provide a general language or possibility to receive tax benefits. In the first case, in the case of renewable energy, those agreements or those agreements or authorizations or concessions don't have to go to the Dominican Congress in order to receive tax exemptions, because they were already provided by the law. However, in the case of concessions and PPPs, the law only, both the previous law and the current one, only refers that projects could benefit from tax treatment. But in order to benefit from those tax treatment, the corresponding agreements need to be approved by the Dominican Congress. Those are in general terms. So unless the Dominican Congress approve the corresponding or the agreed tax exemptions that may be agree among the Dominican government and the private parties, then those private parties would just be subject to the regular tax rules in the Dominican Republic. There's a specific mention to the value-added tax, which in the Dominican Republic it's name ITEVIS, but it's a value-added tax. In the Dominican Republic, it has an 18% rate, and for the PPPs, there's an exemption for 5 years. That exemption is provided by the law, so the projects that are approved by the regulator, by the General Directorate of PPPs and the Dominican government, they can benefit from this exemption on value-added tax for up to 5 years on everything that it's purchased, from goods, services, everything that is affected by this value-added tax. However, for all other taxes, including corporate tax, dividend tax, real estate transfer tax, interest payments paid abroad, they would need a specific exemption agreed in the contract, and that contract need to be approved by the Dominican Congress. That would be the same case in the event the agreement it's been revised. If the revision or the amendment affects the tax exemptions that were awarded in first place, then that amendment needs to also go to the Dominican Congress for approval. There was also mentioning the stability clause. Even though the law does not specifically provide for stability clause, as we see it, is that would be something affecting taxation and as such, either it would, if it's included in the agreement and it's and establishes that the corresponding taxes, either current ones or the ones, the special ones in favor of those of the private parties, then that would need to be approved by the Dominican Congress. So the Dominican Congress, which is the same entity or the same body implementing tax revisions, then it would be approving that stability clause, and in that case, it would be valid, and it would not be affected, or it should not be affected by any later tax revisions, general tax revisions. And I think we have covered everything, or mostly. So, in case there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Polibio, thanks a lot for your presentation, very detailed. We are going to move to Panama case study now with Antonio Alberto Vargas. We have a little technical issue.
Hi. Are you listening?
Great.
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for having us this morning in Latam, evening in Paris and Europe. We are very honored to be here. I am going to talking about the Panamanian PPP contracts that, as Professor Bourgeot mentioned before, Panama has some administrative concessions during 1920s until 2019, because in that years in Panama, the Panamanian government enacted the law 93 of September 19, which approved the PPP regime. So I want to mention some characteristics of this legal framework that I don't know in the other jurisdiction but in Panama we have some limitation for the different projects or the different areas that would be focused on. For example, here in Panama, the law established a limitation that every project considered to be a PPP contract has to have a minimum value of $15 million, and there is no possibility of expressing interest in a project value below this amount. Another special characteristic, for example, different from the other jurisdiction. For example, in Panama, you cannot, or the government cannot show interest in projects focused on, for example, in water. Some institutions are excluded from this special regime. For example, the Panama Canal Authority, the Social Security Fund, a national bank or state-owned banks, and also all the activities related to the extraction of metallic minerals are excluded for the PPP regime. So currently, with this new regulation, Panama has one project that has duly approved and is in execution phase, which is a rehabilitation, improvement, and maintenance of the Pan American Highway of the East. And this contract was signed by the parties by February 7 of this year. And the time of this contract is 18 years with a value of $250 million. We have another 2 projects that are now in the pre-feasibility phase. So we only have 1 contract in execution right now. So I want to really move forward with the taxation applicable to PPP contracts. So this new law it's not include a special tax regime for the PPP contracts. So all the PPP contractors has to oblige to comply with the tax regular regime by the moment. So, however, depending on the area that the project is focused on, there could be a special tax treatment focusing on some advantages and benefits. For example, there are partial benefits in the energy sector for solar and renewable energy projects, such as hydroelectric projects, for example. Therefore, any PPP contract will have to contemplate in its provision the aspects corresponding to this type of special tax treatment. Likewise, for construction and maintenance projects of sports infrastructure, there are tax incentives. So the incentives or special treaty to the PPP contracts will depend, as I mentioned, on the area that the project will be focused on. So, however, from tax and budgetary standpoint, the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Panama plays a fundamental role in the entire contracting process through public and private partnership. This entity is responsible during a pre-feasibility stage to endorse or reject the project based on compliance with tax and budget limits. Although it's not defined in the law, we believe that this is the moment when the ministry responsible for budget planning must determine any consideration regarding tax applicable to the contract for its viability or not. And here is where a particular treatment or determination, for example, of a tax stability regime may be suggested. Another characteristics of our law is that it oblige to the PPP contractor in the moment that the bidding is completed. It has to create a special company domiciled in Panama with a special purpose. So these the projects like co-financed by the government has to or required to incorporate a trust that is responsible for any obligation or all the obligation here in Panama, including taxation. As previously stated, the tax regime applicable to PPP partnership contracts in Panama is a regular national regime applicable to all sectors of the economy, which will vary depending on the sector to which the project belongs. That is Law 93 and Executive Decree 840 do not create or establish a special regime for this type of contracts. Under this premise, we must refer to what is established in numeral 3 of Article 39 of the Executive Decree. So, as I mentioned, the trust is responsible of the collection of the income of the project from user payments or beneficiaries of the PPP project in terms of price and taxes. So that is why we base our consideration that these contracts are subject to the regular regime. Consequently, the PPP contractor will be subject to following taxes, rate, or special contribution generally, which are as exemplified as follows. For example, the general regime considered the income tax in a 25% for corporations. You have to pay the profit tax on local operation, rate which its rate is it's 10%. You have to pay the value add tax. Here in Panama, it's 7%. Property tax on properties acquired by the PPP contractor. Import tariffs on raw materials for development and performance of or their functions and objectives. And local taxes will depend on the municipality where is domiciled the PPP contractor. So in this regard, we believe, as I mentioned, and really rapid mention because of the time, we believe that based on the recent issuance of the regulation, there are no special or distinctive elements developed taxation matters regarding public-private partnership contract in Panama. As we have mentioned in our intervention, the Ministry of Economy and Finance has the authority to evaluate the project during the pre-feasibility stage and to issue opinions regarding taxation requirements, including the evaluation of a special tax stability regime if it apply or could apply, taking in consideration the annual budget of the government, of the public sector. Which to date is not defined in the applicable regulation. And in the only contract with the PPP regime that we have nowadays, there is not established a specific or a special regulation regarding to tax applicability in that contract. They only mentioned that the PPP contractor has the obligation to report and comply with the taxation in a regular regime. So thank you everybody for your time, and we are will be pleased to attend if you are question or any comments.
Thank you, Antonio. Now we have heard every speaker. I think we can move to the Q&A session. We don't have lots of time because some of the presentations were a little bit more extensive than we were expecting, but it was very, very good and great. Maybe just one question. We received. I would like to hear about this from you. The question is: do you know of any litigation cases related to PPP contracts involving tax issues or commitments made by the state or another public entity in this area? Maybe one of you to answer this question to start.
Well, in particular in Mexico, we do not have any knowledge of particular or specific disputes arising from a PPP contract, in particular to tax matters. So we know that there have been some general reviews, which is the general authority of the tax administration to review in general companies, but not in particular looking into specific of the PPP contracts. So that's from what I am aware of in Mexico.
In the Dominican Republic, in understanding that we don't have much projects or agreements under the PPP concept, but as concessions, we have had some litigations, not precisely on taxation, but mostly on execution. For instance, there was a recent arbitration regarding landfills, in which the Dominican government was ruled against. And there has been some renegotiation of agreements, mining agreements, dealing mostly on taxation and contribution by the private parties to the Dominican government.
Thank you, Polibio.
In the case of Panama, as we mentioned, we had the administrative concession. In one moment, we had a lawsuit with an investor with a claim upon its administrative concession. That in that moment he claiming the damage of his investments, but in the new regime we are not have any claim with the new regime of PPP contract. Maybe with the other type of contract.
Bayardo, do you wish to
We
say
had
some words? Yeah.
very briefly. Sorry. Look, we do not have litigation related to taxes yet, and I say yet because our regulation establishes that the tax stability may be revoked by the state anytime. So it's quite. And in the past, we did have extensive litigation, especially during the early 2000s, related to the windfall tax that was applied to extraordinary gains in the oil industry. There was a lot of litigation. Perenco, Burlington, and Occidental Petroleum and other companies against Ecuador. Ecuador lost all of those arbitrations, and I expect we are not going to have litigation in cases related to PPP for breaking the stability clause, tax stability clause.
Yes, because mostly we know that mostly of litigation cases are about the execution of litigation, about stability clauses. Most of them on tax grounds. So okay, maybe it will happen someday. I think there is. I think we are together since 2 hours, right? Yeah, 2 hours. So I think we are going to end this second session of our series. I would like to of course to thank you all of you. Bayardo, Ricardo, Polibio, Antonio, thanks a lot for your time, for your presentations. It was very interesting. I believe it was very helpful for our attendees, in particular those that, would like to invest in each of your countries. So thanks a lot. Thank you, Professor Bourget. I hope you will be with us on the third session.
Of course.
And the third session is going to happen on January 13th. It will cover 6 or 7 countries: Brazil, Chile, Nicaragua, Honduras, Costa Rica, and Argentina. And we hope you will join, and I only have to say to wish you a great day for those in Latam, and for us, for those that are in Europe, a great evening. And again, thank you to all speakers.
Thank you all. Thanks to you.
Muchas gracias.
Everyone.
Adiós.
Hasta luego, adiós.
Thanks to you.